Hi everyone, my name is Chase Magnano, and this is Smart Art Leonardo da Vinci. So Leonardo da Vinci was actually really interesting because he was more than just an artist. He was an inventor, a mathematician, and of course an artist and a sculptor, truly a Renaissance man. So there's gonna be a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about today. So yeah, Leonardo da Vinci, he lived from 1452 to 1519, and some really interesting quotes from him. Learning never exhausts the mind. Art is never finished, only abandoned. And I think these all really ring true for Leonardo. You can see that from, we'll talk about his Mona Lisa, which actually took him 4 years to make. And I don't know about you, but I personally haven't really spent 4 years doing one thing like that and continuously coming back and back and back to it. So, that just kind of like really reflects this, and just all the different types of everything else he learned. It's not just math, it's not just science. There's all sorts of things. It's not just art. And so learning never exhausts the mind. It only, he thinks it only augments it, only makes it better and better and better. So let's get talking. So Leonardo da Vinci. Now this is a possible rendition of what he may look like, but it's also unclear as to what he actually looked like. And so we'll see a number of different portraits of him, all kind of hoping to figure out exactly what he looked like. He was an Italian painter, sculptor, architect, musician, scientist, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, botanist, and writer. So that's a pretty impressive resume, especially for someone, 500-600 years ago. So he's truly an interesting person, and we'll get to see a lot of different stuff about him today. Now, Leonardo actually had a sad childhood. So he was born here in the Vinci city of Vinci in Italy, and this is kind of some of the terrain and landscape of their town. His full name was actually Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, which means Leonardo, son of Piero, from the village of Vinci. And then the title Ser actually indicates that his father was a gentleman. And I apologize to anyone that speaks Italian for what I'm sure was a complete butchery of the pronunciation of that name. So his father, Piero da Vinci, was a notary, and his mother, Caterina, was a poor peasant farmer. So neither his mother nor his father even wanted Leonardo. So you can kind of see that this will create kind of an interesting dynamic throughout his life. And his early years, he kind of got a lot of different really interesting experiences. At just 14, he was apprenticed to one of the finest artists in all of Florence, Andrea di Cione. So, that shows just, even from a super young age, he is being targeted for his incredible skill. And then he additionally has these very, just besides these theoretical abilities, these very, technical skills as well. Just a few here, crafting, chemistry, metallurgy, metalworking, all of these different things that, you can kind of see when he gets into his drawing and painting and sculpting, he's pulling a lot of these things in, and you can kind of see these combinations overlap and how it actually goes. And here are some of his famous journals. He actually referred to these as codices. And one interesting thing you'll notice about this is if you look, you might be saying, Chase, you flipped all of these pictures. When in reality, Leonardo actually would write, he was left-handed, and back then ink would always smear when you're writing with your left hand. So what he would do is write backwards from right to left, and he just learned to read that way. That way his hand would never smudge the ink, and he could do it, which of course results in some difficult to read journals for most people, but really fascinating, and just shows that he didn't really stand to accept like kind of what people said had to be done. He would find his own way to do it. And most of his ideas were purely theoretical, but he had extreme detail. He designed some of the first flying machines almost 400 years before the Wright brothers even came up with the plan. He drew a lot of the anatomy. He drew a fetus, the heart, vascular system, and he even had includes a plan for a 65-foot mechanical bat, which would be the flying machine based on the physiology of bats. You can see these, really, really progressive ideas for his time. And he was just years and centuries and decades ahead of almost anyone else. Anyway, so these were kind of some more detailed special codes. But you can see right here is a example. I'm going to move this so you can actually see it. But this is an example of how he would write backwards, and you can kind of see in better detail. This is kind of what it would have looked like, if we were reading them in real life. And so definitely a tough way to read something, but really ingenious and really smart and forward thinking. And he would still write in the normal direction if he was writing for other people. But when it's for himself, he would just do it like this because he could write so much faster and collect the data better. And so these are just some more examples of, what it might have looked like. So you got hello here, which is backwards. Some words of goodbye. Goodbye definitely looks a little weird to me, but pretty interesting to see kind of what he was doing. So let's see. In the next slide, we got some more examples of these. There we go. So, and then this is the mirror writing right to left. So if you put this in a mirror, we could actually read it fine, assuming you could read 14th century Italian, 15th century Italian. So, I mean, possible, but you might definitely want a mirror if you're going to be trying to take a crack at this one. And one notable thing was just how many things he left unfinished, because he was so varied, and it's hard to be an artist, metallurgist, scientist, and anatomist, all these different things. He often left his works unfinished. So you can see that, there's just this like beautiful painting, but then right down, it's like the lion is almost completely unfinished. There's still just sketches on this page. So he spent so much time doing different things that he would spend, hours probably doing these beautiful, beautiful paintings and then leave them and start pursuing something else. So really, really, really interesting. And this kind of where you can kind of see like his artist and scientist crossover. He's able to model these different anatomies so well because he's such a gifted artist. Well, so you can bring these over, bridge these divides, and you can kind of see the parallels between art and science. And he would always seek out the ideal face. So he's looking for, and he'd slice open the skull to see what lay beneath, and see, he would analyze proportions of people's heads. So a lot of really different kind of interesting work he was doing. And he would actually often watch doctors perform autopsies so he could watch and study the human anatomy. He would get so much experience here, drawing and detailing what the inside of the human body looked like. And even on his own, he would begin his own dissections later, and he would just diagram and detail and sketch every single thing he saw, leading to something really, really, one-of-a-kind renditions of the human body. But at first, he just wanted to be able to paint more realistically. That's why he sought after all of these different, that's why he was looking through this. He wanted to find, if I understand how the human bone structure works better, I'll be able to draw and paint it better. And eventually, he kind of began to hope that studying this would bring him closer to the answer that was the riddle of creation. So you can kind of see where his mind just goes in so many different directions all at once. And here's another quote from him. "We shall describe this mechanical structure of man by means of diagrams." So he was really bringing what was, thought to be just like a not scientific thing at the time, the human body, into the realm of science. And his drawings were actually so accurate that they were still used in some textbooks today, which, that is just outstanding. And these are some of his animal studies. So he wasn't limited to just humans. They say he was often impatient with men, but had a special fondness for animals. So he's definitely probably a kind of a quirky guy, but you can see where he would, where he would kind of combine. And you say, looks carefully at this cat that becomes a dragon. So you can see there's a normal cat, and then it's like over here, and kind of more dragon. It's really, really interesting stuff we look at. And now we're on to arguably well, I mean, he has a lot. So we'll call this in the top 3 most famous paintings, which would be The Last Supper. And something you'll maybe notice is how flaky it is. And can I zoom in? No, I cannot. I cannot zoom in. But if I were to zoom in, I'd show you where all of these, you can see all these like flakes, and you wonder, wow, you'd think someone would try and preserve better such a iconic painting. But it's actually not just a normal painting. It's I believe, a wet fresco, which, let me make sure, because of you would paint with tempera and oil on dried plaster instead of painting a fresco. Okay, so he was doing dried plaster instead of fresh plaster. And what this would cause is it would actually flake off. And so one of the, arguably the greatest works ever done is currently, flaking, and people have to do a lot of work to kind of keep it back, and it's back in really good condition. But this painting took 3 years to complete. And something really interesting you can see here is the symbolism of the triangles. So what you see here is you've got obviously the first triangle. I'll draw these out. Let's get a pen. This first triangle with Jesus, and then you see this second triangle they made right here, and then third. And so you can see this symbolism of 3s, and you can see it follows the lines right up. Crooked 3, and then right here we have one more. So you can see his emphasis on 3s. There's 12 disciples, 12, each of them 3 different spots, and then Jesus is in the center as that. And if we look in, let me get the eraser out, because if we can look in a little bit, there's some really interesting things we can see. Eraser, yeah, perfect. If you look closely right here, Judas is actually clutching a bag of money, which symbolizes him selling out to the Romans and betraying Jesus, which is why it is the Last Supper. So it's a really, really, the detail and attention to detail of it is just truly, truly something else. Move on to the next slide. And now we approach what most people would call his most famous painting, which is quite a high bar after what we just looked at. So this is obviously the Mona Lisa. So he actually began this in 1503, finishing in 1506. And you can see he was one of the first painters that ever used the aerial perspective, which is part of the reason why this work is so well known and so iconic. It was actually a privately commissioned piece of work. It was a picture of, her name is Lisa Gioconda, and she was the wife of the silk merchant. And so you can see this, the trick is, and something that really people like to focus on is this enigmatic smile that she has. She's smiling, she's very mysterious. And they say that when you walk across the room, her eyes will follow you all over. Look at that, giving her a little beauty mark. There we go. And so it's really, really fascinating. And so there's a few different theories of this actually. Some of my favorite are, they thought that she was a pregnant woman, or completely on the opposite lane, she wasn't actually a woman at all, but rather a man dressed up as a woman. So, one of the two of those for sure, but we'll see what the we'll never know what the true thing was. And so this was his attempt at perfection, his attempt to create the perfect person. And so you can really see with his attention to detail and the amount of time that he spent on this painting, that he was truly, truly trying to achieve that. And in the end, after all this work, after all this time working for this person, he decided that he didn't want to give this to anyone. This was just for him. And so he kept this painting actually until the end of his life. And it currently hangs in the Louvre Museum in Paris, behind bulletproof glass, and is regarded as a priceless national treasure. Which made it all the worse when it was actually stolen in 1911 from the Louvre Museum. The museum shut down for an entire week for this investigation. And they even arrested French poet, again, forgive me for the pronunciation, Guillaume Apollinaire. who was arrested and jailed with the suspicion that he was somehow associated with the theft. He in turn eventually accused his friend, Pablo Picasso, and eventually they were both cleared of any wrongdoing. So then, in 1912, 2 years after it disappeared, Mona Lisa was found, and it is believed that a Louvre employee, Vincenzo Peruggia, stole the painting and left with it under his coat after closing hours. So wow, I mean, just really like for something like this kind of, one of the most iconic paintings of all time to be stolen and lost for 2 years was truly shattering to a lot of the whole art community. And then the only self-portrait he ever made was when he was nearly 60 years old, and it is red chalk on paper. So some really interesting work designs here, but not even everyone agrees that this is truly Leonardo da Vinci. There's so much more in the debate. And then so here we're going to touch on his inventors, the inventor side. This is an example of some of his bat wings where he was trying to achieve human flight. And you can see just these detailed diagrams and everything perfectly laid out, ready for, maybe the technology is not here today, but this is things that he would, leave for posterity. And he got all these by studying birds. So it's really, he was a forerunner of modern flight. You can kind of see a little bit more here, where he's different designs and different trains. And although he never achieved true flight himself, you can see that right here would be, laying the groundwork for what would come in the future years. And this is additional his conceptualization of a helicopter, a tank, concentrated solar power, a calculator, the double hull, and he even outlined a rudimentary theory of plate tectonics almost 300 years before the current one that we have stand. So, I mean, you can just see how many things he laid a groundwork for in our modern society that, we just come to appreciate nowadays. And at his final days, one of the last commissioned works he ever did was a mechanical lion that could walk and open its chest to reveal a bouquet of lilies. So he died in Amboise, French, on May 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67. So he had a long life, but not that long, with all the incredible work he did and all the ways he left an impact on our society. He was buried in the church of Saint Florentin, and the church was ruined during the French Revolution and completely torn down during the 19th century. So after the destruction of the church, his remains were transferred to the chapel of St. Hubert. And thank you all for coming to Smart Art again. My name was Trace Magnano, and it was such a pleasure to work with you all today. And if you want any activity to kind of remind you of Leonardo, I invite you to practice mirror writing. It is so much harder than you think, and I'll just try it on here with my hand. And so we'll see. I'll just do my name, C, and then we'd want to go this way to this, start this way so they wouldn't smudge it at all. And then A, and then, that's the wrong side, S, and the E. So that's my name as Leonardo would have written it. And while it's not nearly as good as he did, I hope with practice I could someday be able to write in the same way he did. So thank you all for coming. I invite you to try this, and it was such a pleasure. Please join us for our next Smart Art presentation. I had so much fun today, and we all can't wait to keep sharing different artists with you. We hope you're doing super well. Have a great day, and thank you so much.